how long they're going to fast, I think should be dictated by some understanding of the mechanism. So why is it that having elevated blood sugar, glucose, and insulin ages us more quickly? And or why is it that having periods of time each day or perhaps longer can extend our lifespan?
Well, let's start with what I think was a big mistake, was the idea that people should never be hungry. We live in a world now where there's at least 3 meals a day, and then we've got companies selling bars and snacks in between. So the feeling of hunger, some people never experience hunger in their whole lives. It's really, really bad for them. It was based, I believe, on the 20th century view that you don't want to stress out the pancreas, and you try to keep insulin levels pretty steady and not have this fluctuation. What we actually found, my colleagues and I, across this field of longevity, is that when you look at, first of all, animals, whether it's a dog or a mouse or a monkey, the ones that live the longest, by far, 30% longer, and stay healthy, are the ones that don't eat all the time. Actually, it was first discovered back in the early 20th century, but people ignored it. And then it was rediscovered in the 1930s. Clive Mackay did caloric restriction. He put cellulose in the food of rats so they couldn't get as many calories even though they ate. And those rats lived 30% longer. But then it went away, and then it came back in the 2000s in a big way when a couple of things happened. One is that my lab and others showed that there are longevity genes in the body that come on and protect us from aging and disease. The group of genes that I work on are called sirtuins. There's 7 of them. And we showed in 2005 in a science paper that if you have low levels of insulin and another molecule called insulin-like growth factor, those low levels turn on the longevity genes. One of them that's really important is called SIRT1. But by having high levels of insulin all day, being fed means your longevity genes are not switched on. So you're falling apart. Your epigenome, your information that keeps your cells functioning over time just degrades quicker. Your clock is ticking faster by always being fed. Okay. The other thing that I think might be happening by always having food around is that it's not allowing the cell to have periods of rest and reestablish the epigenome. And so it also is accelerating in that direction. There's plenty of other reasons as well that are not as profound, such as having low levels of glucose in your body will trigger your major muscles and your brain to become more sensitive to insulin and suck the glucose out of your bloodstream, which is very good. You don't want to have glucose flowing around too much. And that will ward off type 2 diabetes.
So hunger, of course, is associated with low blood glucose and low insulin. Do you think there's anything about the subjective experience of hunger itself that could be beneficial for longevity?
Yeah, I do. Though you get used to the feeling of not eating. So I'm kind of screwed that way.
It's like cold water. You eventually adapt.
You get used to it, unfortunately. But there are some studies that are being done at the National Institutes of Health that are able to simulate the effect of hunger, but still provide the calories. And it's looking like there's a small component that's due to hunger. But most of it actually is because you've got these periods of not being fed, and then the body turns on these defensive genes. There's a really interesting experiment that was published maybe a couple of years ago by Rafael De Cabo down at the NIH. What he did was he took over 10,000 mice and gave them different combinations of fat, carbohydrate, protein, and he was trying to figure out what was the best combination. And then he also cleverly had a group, well, 2 groups, one that was fed all the time or ate as much as they wanted, and the other group was only given food for an hour a day. And it turns out they ate roughly the same amount of calories because, of course, in an hour, they're stuffing their faces. It turns out it didn't matter what diet he gave them. It was only the group that ate within that window that lived longer and dramatically longer. So my conclusion is, and mice are very similar to us metabolically, I think that tells us that it's not as important what you eat, it's when you eat during the day.